They say in this small forgotten town, there is a church that no one dares to visit. Why? Because it doesn't exist in the daytime. It only appears after midnight, out of the fog between the trees. The moment you step inside, you will never come back. But one man didn't believe the warnings. And when the clock struck 12, he saw the doors open for him. Ethan Cole was new in town. He thought it was just another quiet countryside place. But on his very first night, he noticed something strange. Everyone in the local diner went silent when someone mentioned the church. An old man leaned closer and whispered, "Boy, never go near the forest after midnight. That church is not for the living." Ethan laughed nervously, thinking it was just a scary story to frighten outsiders. But the way the old man's hands shook, and the way the waitress quickly changed the subject, made him feel something was not right. The rumor was clear. A Blackstone church appears only after midnight, and anyone who enters never returns. A few nights later, Ethan was hanging out with some local boys. They had heard the way he laughed at the town's stories, so they decided to test his courage. One of them smirked and said, "If you're not scared, then go see the church yourself." Another added, "Walk past the old graveyard at midnight. If you're brave, you'll see it." The group burst into laughter, thinking Ethan would refuse. But Ethan, not wanting to look weak, nodded and said, "Fine. I'll do it. And I'll prove you all wrong." The boys exchanged nervous looks. They had never actually dared anyone to go that far before. They knew once midnight came, the fog would rise, and the church would appear. Midnight came. The town was quiet. Ethan walked alone, holding a flashlight, his phone camera recording every step. The old graveyard was waiting for him at the edge of the forest. The air felt heavy, colder than before. Even the crickets had gone silent. He checked his phone. The screen read 12:01 a.m. And that's when it happened. A thick fog began to roll across the ground, curling around the gravestones. The earth seemed to shiver beneath his feet, like something deep below was waking up. Ethan stopped breathing for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Through the fog, something rose. At first, it looked like shadows moving, twisting, and shaping themselves. Then the shape became clear. An old black stone church stood in the distance where, just seconds ago, there was nothing but empty forest. Its walls were cracked and wet, as if it had been standing there for hundreds of years. The roof slanted unnaturally, and the tall bell tower leaned like it was about to collapse. But the worst part was the silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, making you feel trapped. Ethan's flashlight flickered. In that dim light, he saw strange symbols carved into the church walls. Symbols that glowed faintly, like they were alive. His phone shook in his hand as he whispered, "Oh my God, it's real." Behind him, the boys who had dared him saw it too. For just a moment, they stood frozen, eyes wide with terror. Then, without a word, they ran, disappearing back into the darkness, leaving Ethan alone. The church was waiting. Its heavy wooden doors creaked slowly, opening by themselves. Inside was nothing but blackness, and a whisper that seemed to call his name. Ethan stood frozen at the entrance of the graveyard, staring at the church. Its wooden doors had opened slowly on their own, as if the building itself was inviting him in. No wind, no hands, just that long, dragging creak that echoed through the night. He swallowed hard, his breath visible in the icy air. His flashlight flickered again, and he tapped it nervously, whispering to himself, "It's just a building, just an old building." But in his chest, his heartbeat said otherwise. He pointed his phone toward the open doorway, trying to film everything. The camera screen glitched, static lines cutting across the image, but he could still see the endless darkness inside. It wasn't just dark. It was deeper than night, like staring into a hole with no bottom. Then he heard it. A whisper. So soft, so close. It called his name. Ethan. He spun around, pointing his flashlight at the gravestones, the trees, the fog. No one was there. The boys were long gone. Yet the whisper came again, this time from inside the church. Ethan, come inside. His hand trembled as he stepped closer. The air around the doorway felt colder, like he was walking through invisible ice. His phone shook in his grip, recording everything. The old stone walls seemed to breathe, shadows sliding across them, even though nothing was moving. The smell hit him next. Damp wood, rotting leaves, and something metallic, like dried blood. For a moment he thought about running back. But his pride and his curiosity held him in place. He raised his phone, whispering into it. If this video is found, then the church is real. Then, with one deep breath, Ethan stepped through the doorway. The doors slammed shut behind him, so hard that the echo shook the graveyard. And just like that, he was trapped inside. The sound of the doors slamming shut echoed like thunder. Ethan jumped, spinning around, pulling at the heavy wood, but it was locked tight. No matter how hard he pushed, it wouldn't budge. His flashlight beam cut across the church interior. Dust floated in the air like tiny glowing insects, but the floor, it wasn't dusty at all. It looked swept, clean, almost like someone had been preparing for him. Rows of old wooden pews stretched into the darkness. Some were broken, their wood splintered like teeth. Others looked untouched, as if waiting for people to sit in them. Candles lined the aisle, burning with small, weak flames. But Ethan hadn't lit them. He raised his phone, recording everything, whispering into the mic. No one's here. But the candles are burning. The walls were worse. Ancient paintings hung crookedly, portraits of priests. But every single one of them had their eyes scratched out. Long, deep gouges where the faces should have been. Almost as if someone didn't want them to see. Ethan's breath quickened. His shoes echoed on the stone floor as he walked further down the aisle. He felt watched, though every seat was empty. The silence was too heavy, pressing against his ears. He thought he saw movement in the corner, a shadow slipping behind one of the pews. But when he shined his flashlight, there was nothing. Whispers began again. Low, distant, like dozens of voices mumbling from the walls themselves. He couldn't make out the words, but he felt them crawling under his skin. At the far end of the church stood the altar, draped in a black cloth. Behind it loomed a massive pipe organ, its pipes rising into the darkness above. Ethan whispered shakily into his phone. Someone or something still uses this place. And then, just as he stepped closer to the altar, a single candle blew out. No wind, just a breath that wasn't his own. Ethan's flashlight trembled in his hand as he moved closer to the altar. The church was silent, too silent. Only his footsteps echoed against the stone walls. Then it happened. A sound ripped through the air. Deep, low, shaking the entire building. The pipe organ was playing, but no one sat at the bench. Its massive keys pressed down on their own, heavy and slow. The sound wasn't music, it was something darker. Each note dragged like a scream held underwater. Ethan dropped his phone for a second, clutching his ears. The sound was too loud, too unnatural. The floor beneath him vibrated with every note. He forced himself to pick up the phone again, the camera shaking as he whispered, "There's nobody here, nobody. But it's playing." He pointed the flashlight toward the organ. The pipes seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. A black liquid dripped from them, thick and sticky, hitting the floor with soft splashes. The music grew faster, more violent. The air turned heavy, suffocating, like something was pushing down on his chest. Every pew rattled, wood creaking as if unseen hands were pounding on them. The portraits on the walls shuddered too, the scratched-out faces twisting in the candlelight. Ethan's panic rose. He stumbled backward, shouting, "Stop! Stop!" And just like that, the organ fell silent. The echo of the final note stretched through the hall, fading into nothing. For a moment, the silence returned. But it wasn't comforting. It was worse. Ethan turned toward the door, ready to run. But it slammed shut again, harder than before. The pews groaned. The air grew colder. And then, he realized he wasn't alone. From the corner of his eye, he saw them. Figures beginning to fill the seats. Silent. Still. Watching. Ethan whispered, "Oh God, there's people in here." But when he aimed his flashlight at them, they weren't people. Ethan's flashlight shook as the beam landed on the pews. What sat there wasn't human. Dozens of figures filled the seats, dressed in long black robes. They sat perfectly still, their hands folded neatly in their laps, like worshippers waiting for a sermon. But their faces, they had no faces. Where eyes and mouths should have been, there was nothing but smooth pale skin. Blank. Empty. Like dolls that were never finished. Ethan gasped, stumbling backward. His voice cracked as he whispered into his phone. "There are people. No, they're not people." One by one, the faceless congregation turned their heads toward him. Not fast. Not slow. But all at the exact same time. Like a single mind controlling them all. The air grew colder. His breath poured out in white mist as he struggled to breathe. The figures made no sound. They only stared. Then, as if on command, their hands lifted. Every faceless figure pointed directly at Ethan. Not speaking. Not moving. Just pointing. His knees weakened. He wanted to run, but his legs felt heavy, as if invisible chains held him in place. The whispers began again. This time louder. 100 voices, all speaking at once, yet still impossible to understand. They crawled through his ears, burrowed into his skull. He clutched his head, screaming, "Stop! I don't understand. Stop!" The congregation didn't move, didn't flinch. Their pointing fingers stayed locked on him, their blank faces glowing faintly in the candlelight. Then something else moved. At the altar, behind the black cloth, a taller shadow began to rise. It stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Its robe was darker than the others, dragging across the stone floor. The air grew so cold, Ethan's teeth began to chatter. The faceless congregation lowered their hands and bowed their heads in unison, like worshippers greeting their priest. Ethan realized something far worse was about to begin. The shadow at the altar stepped fully into the candlelight. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was tall, too tall. Its body stretched unnaturally inside a long, tattered priest's robe. Where its face should have been, there was a mask. A mask made of bone, cracked and yellow, shaped into a hollow skull. The faceless congregation all bowed lower, their blank heads nearly touching the pews. The air buzzed, like the building itself was alive. Ethan whispered, trembling, "What are you?" The figure raised its arms. Instantly, the whispers turned into a chant. The faceless congregation spoke together in one horrible voice, repeating words in a language Ethan had never heard before. Deep. Ancient. The sound rattled the glass in the church windows. The bone-masked priest tilted its head toward Ethan, and though it had no eyes, he felt its gaze stab into him. His chest tightened, his knees buckling as if unseen hands were pushing him down. The chanting grew louder. The pews shook. Candles blew out one by one until the church was nearly swallowed in darkness. Only the faint glow of the mask lit the altar. Ethan tried to back away, whispering desperately into his phone, "If anyone finds this, don't come here. Don't come here." The figure lowered its arms. The chanting stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. Then the priest spoke. Its voice wasn't one sound, but many, hundreds of voices layered on top of each other, echoing through the church. "We have been waiting." Ethan's skin crawled. He clutched his chest, gasping for air, as the faceless congregation slowly lifted their heads again. Every blank face turned toward him at once. The priest's hand pointed directly at him. The faceless congregation whispered one word together, a word that made Ethan's stomach twist. "Stay." The silence didn't last. A deep, thunderous sound shook the church. The old, cracked bell in the leaning tower began to ring. Slow, heavy. Each toll felt like a hammer slamming inside Ethan's chest. Boom. His flashlight flickered. Boom. His knees buckled. Boom. The air grew so heavy it was hard to breathe. Ethan screamed over the sound. "Why are you doing this to me?" But the congregation did not answer. They only stared, unmoving, their faces still blank, their fingers still pointing at him. The priest in the bone mask lifted both arms higher. The bell rang again, louder than before. With every strike, Ethan felt weaker. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was pulling something out of him. His body trembled violently. His vision blurred. It was like his soul was being dragged from his chest with every toll. Boom. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his stomach. His phone slipped from his hand, the camera still recording as it fell to the stone floor. The screen showed him trembling, screaming, begging for help. The congregation began to sway in rhythm with the bell, their heads tilting side to side, like puppets controlled by invisible strings. The priest stepped closer, the mask glowing faintly in the candlelight. It knelt in front of Ethan and whispered in that layered, inhuman voice, "You belong here now." Ethan shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face. No, please. I just wanted to see. I didn't mean." But the bell tolled again. And this time, Ethan felt his body give way. His hands shook uncontrollably, his mouth opened in a silent scream. The camera's last image of him showed his eyes rolling back, his body collapsing to the cold stone floor. The final toll echoed through the night. And then, everything went silent. The bell stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the ringing. The church stood still, its air thick with shadows. Ethan's body lay motionless on the stone floor. The congregation slowly lowered their heads, as if a ritual had been completed. One by one, their faceless forms faded back into the darkness, until the pews were empty again. The bone-masked priest was the last to vanish. It leaned down, its hollow mask inches from Ethan's pale face. A whisper escaped its many voices. "He is ours." Then it too dissolved into smoke, leaving nothing but silence. At dawn, the forest was quiet once more. The fog had lifted. The black stone church was gone. No trace of it stood at the edge of the graveyard. But near the trees, the townspeople found Ethan's phone. It was cracked, covered in dirt, but still recording. The screen showed everything. The doors opening, the organ playing, the congregation pointing, the priest speaking. And finally, Ethan collapsing as the bell tolled. That was the last frame. No one ever saw Ethan again. No footprints. No signs of a struggle. It was as if he had been swallowed by the earth. The townspeople whispered among themselves, shaking their heads. It had happened before. It would happen again. Because the church always returned. Not every night. Not for everyone. Only after midnight, and only for those foolish enough to seek it. And now, Ethan Cole's name was added to the list of the missing. A warning the townsfolk would whisper to the next stranger who laughed at their stories. But in the darkness of the forest, if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint tolling of the cracked bell, and a whisper calling your name.